Hey, Jamie.
Hello.
You were so patiently waiting quietly while I was trying to get this all figured out.
Get it all put together.
Get it all put together. Hey, man, look at my hat.
Hey.
Oaklandish.
Oaklandish.
Got it for my birthday. And I said, oh, I got to wear it for Jamie. It's like picking out what to wear.
And you're wearing your favorite cardigan.
That's true. Although I have to show you the new cardigan I got on my travels. Very exciting.
Aren't you excited about... Now it looks really stretched out, actually. But I got
I see. I
the
noticed.
background to show the whole thing.
It kind of looks like the beginning of a Star Wars. You know, it's sort of going into the background.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Exactly.
I can't believe I couldn't sing the theme song to Star Wars. Do you know, as a kid, I once sang it over and over in my parents' friends' backseat that to this day, they're like, that almost killed us. I must have been like 3 or 4, just going da 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 over. And they were so not. I feel like I would have told my kid, like, hey, I wonder if we could stop singing that. Like,
you're younger than me, 4 years younger than me, in fact. This makes me wonder, how did you see Star Wars, given that I
didn't say I saw it when it came out. I just said, I didn't say that I saw it when it first came out. Just saying. It was one of my favorites and sang the song over and over.
I want to talk about this just really quickly. I know that this is not what they came to listen for, but let me date myself. I think Star Wars was 77. Is that right? 77? I was 6. That tells you how old I am. And I saw Star Wars in the theater 8 times. 8 times. Of course, there was no other way to see it. So even saying in the theater is a crazy. There was actually no other way to do it. Which then tells me, I have this question to you related to these people who had to listen to you. Who took me, this 6-year-old, to the theater 8 times to see that movie?
Somebody who loved you.
Oh my goodness gracious! That's bananas. I barely take my own child to listen to the movies. Oh my God. So we'll wait for it. It'll come out eventually.
I watched it so many times on a VHS or maybe even a Betamax. I can't remember what we had, but yeah, we watched it a lot.
That's so funny. I also remember I had the Star Wars LP related to the music. So I actually had the sound effects, and it was not just the soundtrack, but the score. So it was John Williams' score and sound effects. Yeah, exactly. It was 2 albums. It was 2 LPs.
Oh my God. Can you imagine just listening to that?
Yes, I can. I can very much imagine listening.
I don't like you either.
We're wanted men.
That's right.
I've seen it. Yeah. I don't know when's the age to get your children into Star Wars if you are going to do that. I don't remember when Joaquin watched it for the first time now. I'm like, I wonder when I should show it to Leo. Although Leo now sees there's so much Star Wars content, like cartoons and such. He's seen some of that stuff. Anyway, I feel so proud of myself, both in that I have a real shirt on. What?
I know. You're not living in the woods anymore.
Slowly but surely. Here, I can even show you real quick. Let's see if I can take this off for a moment.
Real house. Oh, how exciting.
A real house. There's a bookshelf. There is no art hung yet.
That's exciting. Is your mom loving her space, her place, her space?
Having just moved in and watching my mom move into her ADU. My mother did a lot of things. She was truthfully, she was an administrative assistant for an elementary school for 30 plus years. That was her primary. And that's what got me into public school in the first place, and why I've talked about it before, having had every job in a public system. But my mom's passion is art. She taught art. She did a thing called noon art, which was at lunchtime. She would offer to any kid who wanted to come into the multipurpose room to do art. Then she taught. She actually was a formal teacher of art. It's her thing. That's what she's so passionate about. She has more art than and particularly Mexican folk art. That's her true passion. But it's broad. She loves everything. Her house is so full of art. Her little ADU is so full of art that there isn't a drawer that actually has functional items in it. You open it up and there's, Mexican masks. I say this as a connection to Dr. Eric Knost, our guest today, in that, God, he has a ton to say. There's great advice in here, so please listen to those things. But I haven't been this moved in a while by a superintendent. He is truly honest and humble. And that's his passion. That's what his drawers are full of. Every story had a, let me tell you how I messed this up. Or I wish I could have been more clear.
Or
then.
as I hold this, it brings back such powerful memories that you can hear it in my voice and see it on my face. Yeah. I'm so glad that that our audience gets to spend a little bit of time with Eric. He was an exceptional superintendent who I think left his superintendency a little early to put his name in to become our commissioner of education. That didn't work out because our commissioner returned. She had been fired by the governor, and then the governor had a crisis, which was brought on by himself. And so she was brought back. And I don't think he had expected, or none of us expected, that she would be brought back. So he had put his name in, and then she got the job back. And so he went to Iowa and did great work there, and then came back and he was superintendent of a really interesting network. It basically was a charter school network. However, for 21 and older, those who did not get a high school diploma, who are now going back to school, and he became their superintendent in charge of the different locations around the state of Missouri to help individuals without a high school diploma get their diploma, and also job training, as well as childcare, food. It was really cool network that he was leading, and then has retired from that. So really kind of a special guy who I got to know a little bit through our interactions. And he's a drummer. Like, he didn't even mention that. Yeah, he's a Renaissance man. Why don't we do this? You're so right. I love the connection you've made to your mother and her sort of
passion.
Everything. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's her passion, but his passion for people is what showed through. Like, he prioritized it more than anything. He's come to this point where he's like, it's people. That's it. It's being honest, and it's prioritizing the people in front of you. I loved it.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. And after we talk to Eric, we'll come back and discuss the conversation. Thanks.
Perfect.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, we've invited Dr. Eric Knost to join us. Eric has 34 years experience in the education field, 17 years of experience as a superintendent and deputy superintendent in 3 different school districts. And he was the superintendent in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Before that, he was the superintendent of the 3rd largest district in Missouri. Eric Knost, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you, Peter. Glad to be here. Honored to be here.
So, Eric, we've known each other for a long time. As members of the Missouri delegation to a Midwest Council of Superintendents, I was just always so impressed by you. As an outsider looking in, I was so impressed by your ability to communicate the 2 things that matter more than anything in a school district: children and teachers. What influenced you on that approach?
That's all. It feels great to hear you say that, because I'm very proud of the fact that I'm more along the lines of that relationship leader than I am the academic scholar, and I'm humble enough to admit that. I think those have been the reasons for whatever success I've had, but that goes all the way back to my earliest experiences with school and my kindergarten years. I was the youngest in my family. We had some struggles in our family that I may touch on later, but I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want anything to do with going to school. And of course I had to, and, got on that bus the first day of kindergarten, tears running down my face. And it wasn't a pleasant experience. Kindergarten wasn't a pleasant experience, but truth be told, the bus driver, a guy by the name of Mr. Roberts, was my, little angel, maybe you'd call him that. But I made it through kindergarten because Mr. Roberts, I sat on the bus till everybody got off, and he grabbed me by the hand and walked me to class every single day. And I can tell that story in a different way. And I always end up in tears because it's very real to me. And that first lesson I learned in school was that power of connecting with, on my end, a child, and on his end, an adult. And then I later had a teacher who saved me after a very rough kindergarten year. And Mrs. Clamert, Jerry Clamert, she's still out there, texted me about 2 weeks ago. And she ping-ponged me in the right direction just by her relationship. So kids matter, teachers matter, adults matter. Without it, we've got nothing. And with it, we've got the chance to have everything. And that came about in my mind at a very early age.
I'll tell you, I remember the book, Everything I Learned About Life, I Learned in Kindergarten, and I didn't know if that was actually a true statement until you have just mentioned everything started in kindergarten.
Yeah, it was for me. Powerful.
So as I was preparing for our conversation, I was reminded of some of the innovative things that you led as a superintendent. For one, I remember that we wanted to, in our school district, create a program where kids would learn geometry on one day and then do a house construction on the other. And you said, you guys got that from us. And it was true. We got it from you, where kids were learning how to build a tiny house on one day and then learning about the application of that construction work from their geometry class. It was amazing. And I can remember asking a kid in January who was outside working on a house, you're outside, it's cold. And they said, yeah, but we're working on this house so that somebody doesn't have to be cold. Oh my God. They're learning math, they're learning construction, and just that human connectedness, that empathy for others. And then I talked to you about creating an early college program where our, with a local community college where our kids would get both of their high school diplomas and their associate's degree, because I thought that would be a game changer. And you're like, yeah, we've been doing that for years. You have always been at the, beyond all of us in terms of innovations. And I really thought in terms of early college, that partnership was an innovative way to think differently about getting ready for life. I'm comfortable saying that I'm imperfect. We all find ourselves battling this notion that we're supposed to be perfect or pretty darn close. And the margin of error for making mistakes can often be razor thin, particularly for some leaders in particular. And I've come to embrace that. And I'm interested in your thoughts about that term. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I think the best way to describe that from my mind is it resonates with honesty and something that every leader has to embrace. And the earlier you can embrace it, the better leader you're going to be, because, perfection is what you personally define it as. And most people, the cliche thing to say is there's no such thing as perfect. But I'd like to say that imperfection defines perfection in a leadership role. And that's simply what I mean. Embracing your imperfections and embracing your humanistic qualities, it makes you real. It makes you a better person. And again, it's honesty. And the best of leaders are those that put honesty at the forefront. And that's not just about what you say. It meaning what you say and saying what you mean. And, the cliches, walking the walk, talking the talk, all those things. But I think when we embrace our imperfections as leaders, when we accept that we're human, we're not superheroes. We're just not. Maybe the work we do is something in that category, but as human beings, our embracing our imperfections allows us to empathize. I feel, I sometimes feel a tad bit selfish when I say stuff like this, but, I've always been inspired by the students that we're supposed to be inspiring. But I think when you embrace your imperfection, it allows you to look at all of those struggles that your students may have or have had and recognize part of yourself within those struggles. That may be a mind teaser you got to think about a little bit, but I think it comes back to that ability to empathize. And if you force yourself to try to be perfect, and, I'm going to end up talking about this later when we dive into the imperfect leader, because it's relative to my story. But if we try to have ourselves viewed as perfect, it's going to minimize our reach. It's going to minimize our impact because it's not real. And when you're not real, your effect is diminished significantly. So it's powerful to me, but I think imperfect leader speaks to honesty.
I like to think that imperfect leaders are also intentional about noticing how patterns or elements of change, how they change over time, and how those changes impact the system. This very habit is described by the Water Center for Systems Thinking. And I thought about this habit when I saw you were working with individuals whose previous experiences in school may be described as unsuccessful. But what have you noticed about school systems and their ability to meet the needs of individuals, especially those who have not thrived in traditional systems?
Yeah. As far as the evolution of that thought?
Yeah.
Yeah. I told you a story a while ago about my bus driver in kindergarten. I think we have always had that important human touch, which transcends everything. It transcends every barrier. It transcends every hurdle we have. I mean, we find ourselves, we're obviously as schools, we need funding. And so legislators get involved in schools and people get involved in critiquing schools. And there becomes this monotonous mound of unnecessary stuff that gets in the way. But I think a bit of that evolution has been that, what I talked about Mr. Rogers and Mr. Roberts. I love Mr. Rogers too. Mr. Roberts, my bus driver, in.
For those who are listening, I am wearing a cardigan.
You look great.
Now.
That was 1970. And I think the fact that I can sit here with you on a podcast and talk about these things and know that I think people more often than not embrace the things that we're talking about. And I don't know that's always been the case. I mean, the, rigor, and the academic piece is important and relevant, all of that. But I've told people often that I've known so many students. I've been in this long enough to know students who have gone off and done their thing and, came back and reported out, so to speak, or you get to see it play out right in front of your eyes. There are kids who graduate high school who have done phenomenal things academically, but there may have been social emotional issues that weren't addressed because we never used to address those things in schools. And sadly, as smart as they may be, they're usually not those that go off and conquer the world. Flip that around. I can tell you countless stories of high school graduates who did okay academically. They made it, but man, they fell in love with life because of the human connection, because of the relationship, and they're the ones that knock it through the roof. They're the ones that go out and that you hear these phenomenal things about.
You're really speaking to a departure from a factory model where we say students because that is a great way to have a unit of, sort of material. And so far I've heard you really talk about children. And when I spoke earlier about the innovative practices that you brought to your district that we copied, it was because you were really speaking to the individual and not the masses as a number, but rather, how do I meet the needs of individuals?
We judge the work that our schools do. We're forced to judge them because of required accountability through, the proverbial test scores and all those kinds of things. And then we're constantly told all these industrialized nations are doing better. And then you stop and you think, wait a minute, something doesn't connect here because our country is the foremost economic power that exist on this planet. We are number one in intellectual property. We rank high in entrepreneurship. We are, near the top as far as a skilled labor force. You can't get that without effective schools. Yet if you look at test scores, oh my goodness. So to your point, that evolution of sorts, I think that's because educators continue to grow and learn that whether it's a social emotional piece, but that relationship building, that real human heart connection matters and it makes a difference.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we discuss it. Eric, what happened?
In reflecting on this question, mine is kind of a culminating answer. And there was this moment in my career where it really kicked in, where I was like firing on 8 cylinders because I understood this. And I'll get to that, what happened point. But I think I was longing for it all along. I think some of it's relative to the many things we've already discussed in this podcast. But, I found myself as an administrator sometimes having to make tough decisions because policy said I had to make certain decisions. And I didn't, when I was young and still kind of trying to figure out my sea legs, as they say, you don't always have the power or the gumption to react in ways that go against the grain. You learn that over time. But there were decisions that I would be forced to make, policy decisions, maybe relative to, does a student's attendance cause them to pass or fail if they had extensive absenteeism, and I would make policy decisions and then go home and reflect and be literally upset. I mean, literally like gut wrenching upset to where the loved ones would know something's going on. He's in his head and something's going on there. And, or another example would be going through a teacher negotiation session where you'd hear the teachers, propose something and you wanted to say, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. But you kind of learn in our leadership upbringing that, you sit up straight, you have thick skin and you be tough. And of course, you have to consider all the factors from the finances to policies and everything else. But that, remember that old saying, never let them see you sweat. I think that we all, to some degree, are taught that as we're developed as leaders, that you have to be this strong leader. So I think the fact that I was conscientious about that and wrestled with that over the years served me well, because every time I would have one of those gut-wrenching moments where I'd really challenge a decision because it was, related to policy or related to finances, it would make me want to reflect more, it would make me want to revisit it. But really going forward, through all my positions as a leader, administrative intern, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, area superintendent, deputy superintendent, I always wrestled with those things. But there was a time, and I think I got better every time and allowed me to be more of a human leader. But I'm like anybody else. I have a very vulnerable side to me. I'm very comfortable telling you and anybody that cares to listen to what I have to say through this podcast, I don't have thick skin. Peter, if you want to hurt my feelings, I promise you could say something with intent and it would work. I don't have the ability, and I don't care to act like I have the ability anymore to ignore that. Now, why is all that important? That all came to I think a real realization for me in my years in Rockwood. I dealt with two 500-year floods about, I think, 16 or 18 months apart. Now, you have to think about that because that obviously doesn't make sense, but that's literally two floods classified as 500-year floods, literally a year and a half apart. The first one was the scariest thing I've ever been involved in. If I think about it in certain ways, I can get choked up now. But Peter, I didn't know what I was doing. I was having to make decisions and I was trying to help a community, and I wanted to be this guy that looked like he knew what he was doing because I was trying to and by the way, it had impacts on my whole district. It was very large, but severe impacts on one portion of the community, the Eureka area in Eureka High School and the Eureka School community inside of Rockwood. I mean, I had a school surrounded by water, and I thought, what do you do? I think I need to try to go to the school. Why? I don't know. I had to go to the school. The Coast Guard took me to school in a boat, and I pulled my phone out and I did this selfie, and I'm smiling. And I said something like, oh, this is the most surreal boat ride I've ever had. It ended up on national news because I put it on social media, but I was dying inside because I was trying to project as this leader that had it all together. I knew what I was doing. And when I came back from visiting the school, I got off that little boat, and the media was standing there, and it's still floating out there somewhere, but I kind of broke down a little bit. And I walked away from that with this relief because I showed some vulnerability. And as I reflected, I looked before I was willing to show that vulnerability, the rest of my very large district wasn't understanding the problem. This was actually happening right around New Year's Day. It was kind of bizarre timing for a major flood, but we were contemplating if we weren't going to have school. And there were people saying, what do you mean you're going to call off school? There was this some people really hurting and other people with no level of compassion. And once I exposed some vulnerability and the fact that I was very human in my approach, the whole tone changed. And I started realizing that all through my career, those little examples that I gave earlier, I was trying to learn that we are imperfect. We are human. And the best leaders are the ones that can embrace that and do embrace that and allow people to see their vulnerabilities. And since then, I had things bottled up in me. I had trauma in my life when I was the youngest of four children and grew up. My oldest brother had very significant special needs. He grew up in a time where he was just labeled as mentally retarded and confined to a wheelchair his whole life. And I came home from school every day being very aware of what my parents were dealing with. And then when he was 17 years old, he passed away. And, that affected me. It happened in our house. It was, and I'm 58 years old in January, and it still hits me hard. And I'd never talked about that. And when I realized it was okay to be a human, and when something's difficult, to say, look, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm doing the best that I can. And that's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you my best. I mean it from the heart. I'm going to love with every fiber of my being. And I'm going to try to get us through this, but I'm going to screw up. I'm not perfect. And it just, at that moment in my career, that flood time, it just, a whole world opened up for me. And I'm proud of my leadership. I really am. I've made plenty of mistakes, plenty that I'm not happy about, but overall, I'm proud of my leadership, but in all of my roles. But that moment, that realization of allowing myself to be vulnerable, allowing people to see me as the human being that I am, and to admit that I'm not a superhero. I love to say I'm Batman. I like to play Batman. I've even got a little Batman in my office right here, but not Batman, not a superhero. And
it's interesting. You take out this Batman, and it's like, you think of the Bruce Wayne story. I mean, he has to put on this armor to deal with the kind of trauma that he experienced so young in life. So not totally dissimilar from your own experiences, having to watch your parents care for their love, their pride. I mean, their child, your brother. I do think that those are the experiences that are profound, and they help socialize us to a point where when we are in a position to lead others, that we can lead with empathy and compassion. And, you painted this scenario so beautifully. I see you on this boat approaching this school and thinking, what on earth do I do? And, you take a picture of yourself and, I'm sure in your mind you're thinking, I'm going to put on this brave face on this picture. And then at the same time going, I'm also going to be, how could anyone be brave in this moment? This is a total disaster and catastrophe that should only happen once every 500 years. And now it's happened twice in a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I wonder, so many times we're told as teachers when we first start out, don't smile till Christmas, right? Mm-hmm. What a mistake that is for our kids not to recognize that we're human and so are they, and we're going to learn this together and be together. And I think the most successful leaders, although if they don't take care of themselves, there is a propensity for burnout because you're going to wear your emotions quite publicly because that's exactly what everybody needs, but it's also incredibly difficult. I'm curious, if you were to respond to what got overlooked, how would you respond to that question?
I would probably respond by saying that I think that I can reflect back now and realize that a lot of things get overlooked when we try to operate as something that we're not. And because, hey, maybe occasionally a leader just needs a hug. The leader just needs to know that the people to his right and his left are there with him. And I think you're more apt to get that community feel, that collegial feel, if you're embracing that reality versus, I'm this big tough guy. And, because let's face it, there's a fine line between confidence and cockiness. And I think a lot of young leaders have to really come to that realization. And I think in my younger years, I could name plenty of people. In fact, I can embarrass myself if I think too hard about this because I think I, struggled with that fine line between confidence and cockiness. And, some of it we just have to learn. But I think that's what I did wrong. What I did wrong, I gave a few examples. I mean, when I stood up for policy instead of for that student and his attendance issues, it was wrong. It was wrong. I should have been, weak in the way of, that's probably the wrong way to put it, but in the way of, not worrying as much about policy as I was about what was good for the student and what the student really needed. Same thing.
You always worry particularly if you're an aspiring leader and listening to this, or you're new in the profession and you're presented with an opportunity to look at policy and you have potentially some flexibility and you think, this is the way I'm going to go, you hear in the back of your head, you're setting a precedent. You are setting a precedent, and you are worried about how that might expose you in the future. And so it is easy to side with policy. And I hear your reflection on where you might have seen the opportunity to look past policy and see the child.
Absolutely. Or the teacher or the colleague, in a moment where, one of my biggest issues with HR departments in schools over the years have been, somebody can call a HR department. They can be the most caring, lovable people to hear a story about somebody's, a spouse who has terminal illness and they don't have any sick days and they know they've got FMLA, the money, and what can you do? And the answer is, oh my goodness, we're so sorry that you're going through that, but how if he doesn't let us help you? I mean, of course they don't say it that way, but that should never happen. That should never happen. And I think that's an extreme example of what young leaders, and I myself did many times in my young years, learning how to lead, leaned into the parameters more than leaning into the human being. And again, I'm happy to say that evolved for me over the years, but I'll tell you, it was never more crystal clear in my eyes than when I got off that boat, talked to that TV station, and then walked on. I went down to the downtown Eureka area to help sandbag that night. And I just felt like a new leader and a new human being. And the things I noticed that opened up and smoothed out for me after that. And that's when I started in talks. I'd started talking about more personal things and more opening up. I had never talked about, losing my brother. I would have never done that. I would have never done that on a podcast, but maybe it's therapeutic to some degree too, but that's okay because that makes us, better leaders again through embracing those things and being better at, our ability to empathize.
It's interesting. Transformational leaders typically can look back and there was a transformative moment, and that was your moment. I'm curious about relationships and how that experience or your experiences over time, what have you learned about relationships, particularly when you think about the superintendency? It is really hard to have meaningful relationships internally with the internal organization because they do see you as their leader. As much as you would like to shed the title and say, we're colleagues and this is a flat system as best as I can make it, it always reverts, or at least there's a propensity to revert back to this hierarchy, and while you're trying to still flatten and say, no, we work better when we work together. And I'm curious about, what did you learn about relationships?
I think the way you just described that is correct. And I think that there's, as far as trying to flatten everything, I don't think you can ever get it fully flat. But I do think that every effort you make to flatten it goes 100 miles in the right direction, but even an inch in the right direction matters. And I think you do that in a lot of different ways. It could be a whole other conversation here about an imperfection, but all the times that you can look back and say, gosh, that employee walked by my office and I was busy and they kind of waved. And I thought, I wonder if they wanted to talk, but you didn't talk. Take 5 minutes and you're going to gain 100 miles in flattening things. Again, be human. Don't try to put everybody in a way. Don't put yourself on a pyramid at the top. Put yourself on a pyramid at the bottom where people are, you're taking their weight on, but you're also letting them know that weight's heavy for you. I think it goes a long way with leveling things. And so it's not only about advocating. It's why I try to give stories, not only about students, but we're leaders for, superintendents, especially, in a small district, you're a community leader, and a large district, you're a community leader. Some school districts, and I worked in the Melville School District, there's no town center in the Melville School District. There's no mayor of Melville. And quite often, the local politics and the goings on really had the school district right at the center of things. So you have to be that de facto leader. But I think what you said is correct. It's a real challenge, but we can be seen as real human beings. And, I do want really quick to say that I think there are slightly different types of vulnerability. I talk about it in two different ways. I talk about it the way we've been talking about it today, that it's okay to realize that, every leader can be vulnerable, but there's also vulnerability that opens up weaknesses. And that's usually the result of situations that are chaotic. If you don't have unity, the opposite of that is usually confusion. And when you have confusion in a system, then you're opened up to all kinds of vulnerability. So I just want to clarify that, especially for the few people that may have heard me speak about this stuff before, that type of vulnerability you want to avoid, that is the result of chaos. But human vulnerability, I think, goes a long way to leading students, to leading teachers, to leading, people that are so important in the system, bus drivers, custodians, taking the time to be one of them and acknowledge what they do, and even a willingness to do what they do just goes a long way for your ability to lead.
So when I think about the examples you've given, whether it be the flood, whether it be negotiations with teachers, whether it be the student discipline policies, practices, whether it be the Federal Leave Act, FMLA, I imagine there's a common thread about what is frustrating. And I wonder if it is that while superintendents are seen at the top of the organization and as an individual who is believed to be able to make sweeping change quickly, sort of I decree, there's a level of frustration that I have felt where I could not move an entire large organization. You can't just make decrees and then all of a sudden it changes. In fact, You just find yourself just sort of making decrees and you're all talk, no action, or all talk, whatever. I don't even know what the phrase was.
Right.
And so I wonder, in those situations, what was frustrating for you?
I think what's always been frustrating for me as a leader, specifically in education, so I have to specify that because I assume it would be the case in other situations. But for schools, I think we want to be cultures of people, but the powers to be sometimes cause us to be cultures of compliance. And, I've spent my whole life as a leader. I've worked toward this. So I spent a majority of my leadership career trying to take the bureaucracy out of education because of the examples that we talked about. Hey, I want to help you, but I can't help you because of X. You want to help somebody, you can help somebody. It may be small, but you can. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. I think it's the leaning toward a culture of compliance by default, checking the box, staying inside the parameters and the protocols, instead of being a culture of people and taking care of people.
In the end, what was something that was good that came out of the process or out of these experiences?
I think that, when you can look back and reflect on, I talked about that epiphany that I had getting off that boat after that flood and things opening up to me, how you can start seeing the real impact of your leadership. You can start feeling the impact of your leadership. You suddenly allow people to see you in a different way and they approach you in a different way. You walk in a school building and there's genuine joy, or at least a lot of really good actors appearing to be happy that you're there, making you feel part of them. How many superintendents would admit this? One of the hardest things about being a superintendent is that you can't walk out of your office and go commiserate with the superintendent across the hall. You're the only one that's precisely in that specific position, and it can be lonely. And how many superintendents would admit that at some point in their career, they were in a classroom, in a building, at an event where they were there because of who they are, but they didn't necessarily, in their heart of hearts, feel like they belonged or they were part of it, because you're that man behind the curtains, that woman behind the curtains. And the epiphany that I had, what changed for me was I could start feeling that sense of belonging a whole lot easier, because when I would walk in buildings, I felt more like a brother, more like a colleague, and absolutely like a friend, way before it was like, hey, the superintendent's here. I thought students gave me a nickname a long time ago as a high school principal of DK because they didn't want to call me Dr. Knost, and I didn't want them to either, quite honestly. And a student, Kyle Jacobs, who I'm still quasi friends on social media with today, he came up with DK, and I love that. And after that epiphany, to walk into a school building and have a teacher colleague refer to you in a name that just makes you feel like part of something, it's powerful, and it does change things, and it changes your ability to lead, and it changed my ability to lead even more effectively than I had. And I think
I thought that one of the things you were going to say was the number of programs and things like that. And I'm even more impressed with this conversation and with you, because it wasn't about the things that one could look back on in terms of what they created, but rather the human piece, the sense of belonging, at the very core of who we are as humans is wanting to feel like we belong. And so when you think about what was something that was good that came out of this, that I was able to feel like I belonged to something bigger than myself. And, that's pretty remarkable. In the end, this podcast is designed to help aspiring early in their career and established leaders learn from the experiences of other leaders. And so with that in mind, what advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
I think it would be relative to what we've been talking about. And I think that some of that has to come about after an evolution, if you will, and through experience of leading. But the best advice I can give young superintendents, young leaders, young administrators is just to connect in every way possible. Get out of that office and be a part of what it is that you're leading, and let people see you as a part of what they're doing. Be interested in what they're doing. Don't ever underestimate. If you're a genuine person and people don't feel that you have to establish this feeling that you're not there to judge, you really can never underestimate the power of being present for people. And I think, I think it's cliche, if I knew then what I know now, I can really think of how powerful. And I see some young administrators, and some of them I consider, that I know, or my colleagues who I've worked with them, and I see how they're approaching it. It just thrills me because I feel like they get it. And maybe that's a result of what we've been able to teach and what we've been able to model. But just be a person first and foremost. Care for people, build those relationships, build trust. You build trust through building relationships, and you're going to need trust at some point. You're going to have your 500-year flood. And that may be a metaphor for most people for whatever else that you experience. You're all going to have a COVID. And if you haven't built trust through building relationships, I'm sorry to tell you, you're going to have an arduous hill to climb. So it never goes to waste to take the moment, have that conversation, say hello, look people in the eye, give a hug when you need it. Don't worry about that. If your heart's in the right place, nobody's ever going to, take that as a misstep or something that shouldn't have happened. Just be a heartfelt leader, love people, take care of yourself, allow yourself to be human and be vulnerable.
You've got so much advice. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if someone's, superintendents often are type A people, and there's somebody who's like sitting there writing down like, oh, okay, I'm going to take care of people. I'm going to hug everybody.
Yeah. I'm probably making it too difficult. It's
You're
simple
talking about attending to people and attending to them and see them and be there for people.
Yeah.
My guest again today was Dr. Eric Knost. And Eric, thank you for being a caring leader. Thank you for being a vulnerable leader. Thank you for being a human-centered leader. Thank you for someone who embraces a culture of curiosity and compassion. And so I will say, DK, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it.
So we're back. Really great episode. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a while, but he literally did make me feel something and near cry when he talked about his brother. That really stood out. I'm so impressed with him. So impressed. I wondered, I don't know if he has, but I'm like, this is what a great example of someone who's learned how to process his feelings.
Yeah.
How helpful that is as a leader.
Yeah. For you personally, I imagine that there was a profound impact in terms of just being a parent.
Yes. Yes, him saying that he sees what his parents are doing and, and then managing that. It makes me wonder, it does make me wonder how my children, how Pablo's brothers, Leo and Joaquin, see their brother and see us managing their brother. I know for Leo, it's mostly just an annoyance, like this big brother.
Maybe just based on his age. However,
Right.
I imagine each one of us has been socialized by our earliest experiences. And I know the love and care that Pablo gets from everyone in his community.
So that really touched me. He said, can I share that comment? Where is it here? He says, and when he was 17 years old, he passed away, and that really affected me. It happened in our house. and I'll be 58 years old in January, and it still hits me hard. And I've never really talked about it. And when I realized that it was okay to be human, that it's okay when something's difficult to say, look, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm doing the best that I can, and that's what I'm going to give you. This is it. I'm going to give you my best, and I mean it from the heart. I'm going to love with every fiber of my being, and I'm going to try to get us through this. But I'm going to screw up. I'm not perfect. And it's just at that moment in my career, during the flood, when he talks about his after-action review, a whole world opened up for me, and I'm really proud of my leadership as a result. I wrote, this superintendent who understands the benefit of therapy and or sharing emotions is so refreshing. It was wonderful.
Yeah. I'm always touched when I hear people say, if there were more people like so-and-so in the world, it'd be a better place. And I certainly felt like if the world had more leaders that were willing to be authentically vulnerable, not just say it's important to be vulnerable. Yeah.
That's how it felt. I loved it. I loved that. I loved his reflection on the after-action review. I pictured him on this Coast Guard boat going out to the school and then not going, what do I do that I'm here? I'll take a selfie? Wait, what do you do?
We used to joke about him, and he knows that we'd call him the selfie soup because he was always taking a selfie with kids. And partly we made fun of him because I think we were jealous about the connection he had with kids. They all recognized him. Right when he said, they call me Dr. EK or they call me Dr. K or something, that you could tell that he really had that meant more to him. And, not many superintendents will say what he said in terms of, look, there are parts of curriculum instruction I just don't know. And I'm going to have to be okay with that because, I'm generalizing. I'm sort of summarizing what I remember hearing. But I thought that was profound. To him, It was about being a human-centered leader. And then I can surround myself with those experts as long as I'm leading first with heart.
Tell me, in becoming and I realize that becoming a superintendent, the interview process is not singularly universal. Different numbers, different board members, different makeup of the board.
Yeah. Although I'd say that it's fairly standard. It's standard.
Well, this is helpful then. Okay. Then here's my question. How much do they ask about EQ, about, emotional intelligence?
They don't.
Why?
They try to get at it, I guess. Look, I'm not on a search firm, so I don't know why they don't ask that. They typically, board members are more interested in knowing how well do you know our district and looking at our achievement. What will you bring to this district to improve achievement? Mm-hmm. How important is it to weigh our opinions as a board member? How important is it, or how have you demonstrated that you have engaged your external systems, parents, community members, as you make decisions? Look, that's just my own thoughts, is that it's fairly standardized, that you have your interviews, you have your material data that you've submitted. They may talk to some of your references. You do a community event, you answer questions, and then the board makes a decision. And it's a very quick process that sometimes surprises me because you're thinking about being a CEO of 3,000 employees that, an initial review of your documentation, an initial conversation, maybe looking at some data and saying, what conclusions are you drawing from this data and what might be your first step? And then the only answer there is I put together a stakeholder committee to review this together. Because the moment you're like, well, here's what I would do, right? Then this person leads by decree, declarations. And then community, does the community feel okay? And then, negotiations and a superintendent's hired.
Yeah, fascinating. He opens with this story about the bus driver, Mr. Roberts. And we've talked, you and I have asked this question about, who is the adult for you, in schooling? But this one hit a little differently in that, and it's within this banner of dealing with your own emotions, especially when you are scared. And so I wanted to change the question from, was there an adult that really supported you, to who was the person in your schooling experience, if you had one, who supported you when you were scared, really scared as a kid? Because that's what happened. Mr. Roberts supported him when he was really scared. He was scared to go to school. And Mr. Roberts got off the bus with him and walked him to class.
Do you think he was scared of school? That's interesting. I heard it that he felt alone, it seemed. Like I hadn't thought of it as scared as much as he was describing. He paints such a great picture. I think that's why it captures your heart and your mind. There's things going on at home and he's feeling somewhat alone, and maybe he's scared to enter because it's just another place to feel lost, And yeah, this bus driver was such a grounding force for him that he then relied on it each day to take his hand and walk into school. Because clearly, when he got to school, there was others who made him feel welcome. It was just getting off that bus and taking that leap of faith required just a little extra help.
I mean, I guess I don't know whether he was scared or not. I'm basing it. He wasn't the first to get off the bus and support.
No, great reluctance.
So
And
then it made me go, it's
Maybe
not
you're
just
scared.
about who an adult or a teacher or someone who inspired you as a kid, but who was the person that helped you when you needed it in that way, emotionally. That's what I think Dr. Knost does, is I think he has realized that as a leader, he's there to support people emotionally as well as intellectually and cognitively.
Yeah.
Who was the person? And maybe you can't think of one.
I mean, when I was bullied and things like that, I don't think there was no one at school. Maybe that's like Long Island for you, you know? I mean, I have such stories, but I don't think there was anyone who, I mean, in high school, a bunch of us, we found refuge in the band room as a community.
Yeah.
But the band teacher was not the person I go talk to with problems. And then,
I have such a good example of that too.
No.
Me too.
And then, but our assistant principal was fantastic. He was, yeah.
I wonder if that question, if we could change that question, the survey question that says, is there an adult that you can go to? That if you were to add that detail that, is there an adult that you could go to when you're scared or when you're nervous or connected to an emotion, if that would ever change the data in how students respond in that survey question. I thought it was really touching and really reflective, both of Mr. Roberts and of the path that Dr. Knost took. What resonated for you from the interview?
When I re-listened to this conversation, one piece that really spoke to me was, and I also still struggle. He said he wished that there were times that he could have made a human first decision that even if it conflicted with policy was the right thing to do. And I think the example he gave was, human resources, all well-meaning people saying, I'm really sorry about this life-altering illness that seems to have changed everything for you and your family. And sorry, we can't do much about it for you. And for me, one thing I still regret is I wished we had created and figured out how to create a sick pool. This was something that our teachers had asked for years, and I succumbed to individuals within the organization that just said, no, we can't do that. Because how will we make decisions? What if your child is sick? Okay, yes, they get covered. What if their child is not yet a stepchild, but is a child living in their house, or a nephew who's like a child? Do we allow them to also access this sick leave? What about their dog? They don't have any children, but their dog is the most important thing to them. Do we allow them? And it was like an avalanche of what ifs that I said, fine. However, we should have done it. We should have all just donated a day. We did it in Oakland. I'd never had to access it, but I don't know how the decisions were made. But everybody donates a day who wants to. That makes them eligible for the sick pool. And then you figure it out. You create a committee that makes the rules, that, wrestles with it together. Those who are the beneficiaries of the pool will create the rules for that pool and then just do it. And so as he was describing how he wished that he could have made a different decision, that was running through my head. And all I said was, yes. And what we're often told is you're creating a new precedent, and that becomes impossible to figure out. And he said, yeah. But I think he probably was thinking, yeah, that's just an easy excuse for not doing it. And we should have done these things. And so for me, that was my biggest takeaway was, gosh, leaders, I wish we sometimes could be reminded that while this job is so lonely and that it's so important to connect with others, that as part of that connection, we can support each other by saying, we can do this. It's going to be hard and we'll have to figure it out. And there'll likely be legal challenges and all those kinds of things, but we should do it because it's the right thing to do for somebody who, if you're a first-year teacher, you may not be eligible for FMLA because you've been teaching for a year. So let's say you got into a terrible car accident and you're out of sick leave because you didn't really earn that many yet, and yet you could have accessed the sick pool because that's the right thing to do. So that's a regret I have, and that was re-listening to that conversation was a reminder to me of if I'm ever in that position again or can help influence those kinds of decision-making, that I should.
I love that. That was great. Thank you for that. Another example of why I'm your friend, or I like being your friend. And that the word I regret, when people say, I have no regrets, and I'm like, what? I'm literally, it's like a confetti gun. How is that possible?
Meanwhile,
No
before you
regrets.
said that, I was thinking, like, what are you married to? One of those people who can make you like snap their fingers and you forget everything that just happened, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah. And they make you walk around like a chicken, like a,
Oh,
but a
my goodness.
confetti gun. That is
Oh my
so
goodness,
funny.
so funny. And it makes me say, good. Yeah, your reflection in that way tells me that sometimes we have to make decisions that are better, that are good for people, that are better for students, that are better for the people that you serve, that have risk, that there's risk in it.
That's what you just meant. That's what it is. The crux of it was I wasn't willing to take the risk because I may have been too worried about losing my job or something like that. Or that it was going to blow up in my face and people would say, I told you. You see, it doesn't work. Meanwhile, the reward would have been an incredible, like, we would have been one of the first in the state, if not the first in the state. And everyone would have said, I love working in a place that they care so deeply for their employees that when they're ill and they're out of sick leave, this pool takes care of them.
right.
We
Right.
take care of each other. When he says we are one, here's another example of him meaning it. Instead of those empty sort of like heroes work here posters that people
Yeah.
were putting up during the pandemic. Heroes work here. Yeah, thanks. Like, you want to be recognized, but oh my God.
Goodness. Anyway, I appreciate it very much. I loved it. Another good
Me
one
too.
in the books.
Thanks for listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiefelman.
And I'm Jamie Almanzan.
We will see you next week.
See you next
Bye,
week.
Jamie.
Bye.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.